Hello, everyone. This is Grandmaster Hans Niemann. In this chapter, we're going to be covering the move 3 to a6. Per usual, we're going to be starting with d4, knight f6, knight c3, d5, and bishop to f4. Like I mentioned many times, this is going to be the starting position in the Jobava London if you are not considering the side variations, which are still just as important as the main line, since this is a lifetime repertoire. As I mentioned, we're going to be covering the move a6. This move might look weird to some of you. This is one of the less common moves. Definitely not as popular as e6 or g6 or bishop f5, but it is a credible move and a serious move that we should definitely treat with proper respect. This is a move that I've faced recently. Artemiev played this against me. So, I think whenever we play sort of an opening like the Jobava London with, and we surprise our opponents and we sort of catch them off guard, anything can really happen, right? It's possible for our opponents to take a lot of different paths just because of the surprise factor. I think when you're surprised, it can really throw you off. And a move like a6 makes a lot of sense from the perspective of just stopping the knight to b5 idea, because that's sort of one of the central themes of this course. And although having a central theme of the course being a one-move threat might not be perceived as the most advanced idea, as we've talked about, it has positional value. So a6, I definitely wouldn't say it's a directly challenging move. It's not something that we're going to be like that worried about, and we're going to be, we don't have to memorize much here. We just sort of have to understand the critical ideas. So we're going to, start with the developing with e3. And here we already have, quite a few options in terms of what they can play. So the most natural by far is to play e6. There's actually interesting transposition after bishop to f5 and after knight f3. We transpose to 3, bishop to f5. So all the positions where the bishop was going to f5, I included solely in the 3 bishop to f5 chapter just to clarify things. So here we only have to worry about e6. I wouldn't say worry. We should use a more. We should only consider c5 and so e6, c5, and b5. So let's start with e6, just the most natural move by far, right? Preparing to develop the pieces. And here we're going to be playing the move g4. And in this case, the great thing about a6 is that the themes remain sort of the same, right? Well, the move g4, we're not. It's not like this is a foreign idea. Maybe if this is the first chapter that you're watching, then it might be the first time you're seeing this. But whenever our opponents don't really put direct pressure in the center with c5, we often have the opportunity to expand with g4, g5. And especially with a6, e6 being on the slower side, we have this opportunity. So after g4, there are a few ways that our opponents can react. First of all, there's bishop b4, putting direct pressure. There's bishop to d6, challenging the bishop. There's c5, going for this immediate, challenging the center. And there's also, h6, right? Being a little bit prophylactic. So there's a lot of things that, a lot of variations here that we're going to discuss. And there's a lot of possibilities. And I wouldn't say that it's that important to memorize and stress too much about knowing every single detail, but paying attention to the common themes. So one point after bishop b4, one concrete point is the move knight g to e2, which looks quite weird because, you might ask yourself, why not simply take this pawn? But in this case, we have the move rook to g1. And this idea with g4, sacrificing the pawn, followed by rook g1, is not foreign to us, right? And in this case, we're actually forcing our opponents to play g5. If the knight goes back, we simply recapture the pawn. So they can sort of get the bishop pair. And after rook takes, pawn takes, knight c6, we go knight h5. And after knight h5, we can play knight g7 check to sort of take away the king's castling abilities. Next, we're sort of aiming to play queen f3 castles and sort of try to go for a king set attack, but also our pieces are quite active, right? The rook and knight work well together. The bishop can come to d3. So this is sort of a possible idea if they take. So from a concrete perspective, I would say this is crucial. Let's say they castle. This is one of the really most fascinating things. You play a3. Whenever you have the chance to play a3 and sort of force the bishop to make a decision, right? Obviously, you don't want to take and give the bishop pair. Not only the bishop pair giving the dark squared bishop, which would then leave our dark squared bishop uncontested. Bishop retreating back to e7, g5, and this is going to be the one of the most interesting variations in this line. Let's say knight to h5, which is now we play h4, and this knight is a little bit unsure where it's going, right? If given the opportunity, we're going to play the move bishop to h2, and then this knight would have sort of no escape, and we could sort of target it with bishop g2, bishop f3, maybe knight to f4. So it's crucial for our opponents to trade the knight and play c5, immediately putting pressure in the center until we break through over here. However, we're going to break through anyways. After bishop to d3, c4, we're going to sacrifice the piece. King to q7, queen h5, king g8, g6. And this is actually, unfortunately, this isn't my novelty. I would love to say that this is my novelty. But this has actually been played in a game of Wesley So against Alireza Firouzja. And I guess this is somewhat known at the top level as an interesting theoretical continuation. And after fg6, knight takes g5, the move rook f5 is crucial, forcing the queen to h8, the queen coming back, again, maintaining the attack. Castles is coming. And here there are a few moves. There's a choice between knight c6 and bishop f6. Both moves are aimed at sort of covering the e5 square, preventing the knight from coming there, and also adding the additional defense of the king. So Wesley played the move bishop to f6, which I want to look at first, and this is actually a mistake. And after knight h8, king e7, after castles, we're going to be breaking through immediately with e4 and d5, and this king in the center is going to be a bigger problem. So the king is forced to run, because if the king stays in the center, it doesn't matter if you're up a piece, because what are these pieces doing, right? From an activities perspective, white is the one with more material. So king d7, e4, takes d5, and now you must actually go on the counterattack to even survive, because everything's open up, right? All the queen, knight, everything's perfectly placed. And there's actually, you have to go on the counterattack after queen a5, knight c4, king to c7. And there's, the long forcing variation continues here. Again, don't be overwhelmed. I just think it's a great way to sort of introduce this by showing how forcing things can be and how much pressure you can put, as I've, practical pressure, said that a million times. Knight f6, rook f6, queen g7 here, and king b1. And this is sort of where things calm down a bit. But first of all, we can count the material, right? I think we have 5 pawns against 3 pawns. We have this passed h pawn, which can be extremely powerful. We have the king, bishop, and rook, which are just doing nothing. We have a great pin. The knight can swing into the action in many ways. The king is relatively safe on b1. Maybe c3 can put some slight pressure. This is going to be a really difficult position for black to defend. And this sort of forcing line, right? Let's say our opponents play the move knight to c6, and here it actually leads to a ridiculous forced draw. D takes c4, knight h8, king e8, castles. One point is, like, if we were to castle immediately, it would allow like queen g8, and then there's nothing better than a repetition here, because we can't trade the queens, right? Because then our attack would simply perish. So knight h8, forcing the king to e8, preventing this idea, and then castling. Queen a5 again, rook g1, preparing to bring the next piece into the attack. Bishop takes a3, only move. The funny thing is while black is sitting here like, oh my god, like what am I doing? I'm so scared they're going to attack. You actually have to have the mental stability to be like, oh, actually, I'm going to checkmate you, and I'm going to force perpetual. Rook g7, bishop b2, king b2, queen b4, king c1, queen a3, and it's simply a draw, which is just absolutely ridiculous. So I suppose if black has nerves of steel here and is able to go on the counterattack while under significant pressure, then they can sort of hold the draw. This is 25. This is a 25 move sequence, which is just ridiculous. And this is sort of just a taste of the current theoretical battles that are happening here, and things that Wesley So and Firouzja have picked up on and analyzed. So if we're going back to sort of the main line, after g4, bishop b4, 92, I think the most logical way is just to play h6 and sort of just prevent g5. Now we kick this, and then knight to c1 is actually quite a nice maneuver. We're going to maneuver this knight and then finish the development. c5 you take, and if if you just recapture, then we can just finish development either d3 or b3, and then white simply has an advantage. So you have to go knight to d7 to sort of recapture this way. Otherwise, because taking on c5, you're just gonna have to move back anyway. So for knight d3, knight c5 takes queen d3. Next, you're gonna castle, and then you're gonna go h4, g5, bishop g2, and this sort of castling and going for this kingside attack is going to be super thematic throughout this course. And I'm gonna point out a lot of different moments where we're doing the exact same thing. Another moment like castles, let's say castles here, or no, sorry, not castles here. Like let's say b5, which is sort of a weirder move. We go a3, we play g5, h4. Whenever the knight is coming to h5, this h4 idea is super thematic. Takes, and again, we do have they have the bishop pair, but again, like okay, not queen g4 now because of e5, but this sort of breakthrough and pressure on the king side is just really, really nice. And you have a significant lead in development. Whenever black is always hesitant to castle because of this sort of pawn chain that's just waiting to crash through at any moment. So you're sort of in this limbo of where you want to castle. Well, white has both theoretically you could castle kingside, but you can also castle queenside. So you have a little bit more flexibility when it comes to your king safety. So that's always a nice thing to have. The last move that we can consider here is I believe we considered all the moves in this position. So essentially, the whole point is just to play g5 and extend on the king side. And once you have this king side extension, it puts the black king, if castled on the king side, in a bit of an uncomfortable situation. So bishop b4 is one of the more direct lines, but also bishop d6 makes a lot of sense. Sort of trying to trade this bishop. But we're actually going to play the move queen f3 here. And this queen f3 move and this queen d3, bringing out the queen early, is going to be one of the most common themes throughout this opening. And it's interesting because in terms of the modern, or not modern principles, but principles that were taught, don't bring the queen out early. The main point behind this bringing the queen out early is that this diagonal from h to b8 is arguably the most critical diagonal of the entire opening and maintaining control of that. For example, there's times where, like, let's say the pawn was on f3 and the pawn was on h4. There's times where you go like queen d2, queen h2. But especially in this case, controlling the f4 square really, really restricts our opponent's pieces and controls the dark squares. So let's say we take, and they try to go here. We can simply take and play f3. And now we've sort of transferred into this endgame. And this endgame is beneficial for multiple reasons. First of all, we have sort of extended on the king side and can further extend on the king side, granting us a little bit more space, right? And whenever we have space, we can maneuver, we can improve our position. Our position has potential, right? Our position has upside. Additionally, these double pawns, since it's an endgame, aren't that great. There's an idea of playing a4, a5 to cement this structure as well. You have sort of pawn breaks, maybe c4 could be a possibility sometimes. e4 also is looming. You have all these different pawn breaks as well. You have some slight weaknesses, and you have the long-term weakness of these double pawns, which is something that you can sort of everything will come together, and you just play slow, normal chess. So here, if they don't really challenge the queen, you're just going to go g5, right? And the queen actually being on the king side, if they ever were to castle, is already a big advantage, right? Because the queen can aid in the immediate attack on the black king. b5 is another sort of variation, but let's say knight 7 you play h4. Again, queen g3 maintaining, like let's say queen e7, queen g3, and you're maintaining the control. The knight's going to come to f3. You can continue to go h5, g6, and put more pressure on the king. You can even castle queenside if you want, but you're not even under direct pressure to castle because the center is currently closed. So you maintain that flexibility and you keep your opponent guessing. Another move is to play c5 immediately, and this is, I think, especially in a6. What I've noticed. Let's just go back to here. I want to talk about this from a theoretical perspective, right? This might not be that interesting to some of you, but what I found is that in this specific opening, there are holes in even the best players' theoretical understanding. For example, after e6, e3, e6, g4, c5 is considered to be an okay move and is one of the most popular moves. However, after significant analysis, I've concluded that this move is simply dubious. And this is a move that all the top players are playing, or not all of them, that may be a slight overstatement, but there are holes in the current, since the opening, let's say, hasn't had like a modern touch. It hasn't, been analyzed with the use of modern computers, which can make a lot of things work. There are certain holes, and as well as I wasn't just analyzing with Stockfish, I was analyzing with Leela as well, in many of the chapters. And Leela, then was able to be of great assistance in finding interesting ideas that were not obvious to Stockfish at all. So there are holes, even if you're a top player. And like I said, this course is for anyone and everyone. There are holes in theoretical knowledge of the current elite chess players in the Jobava London because people simply aren't analyzing it properly. The level of analysis people are doing here, how seriously they're taking it, is absolutely ridiculous. And people have no idea what they're doing. Perfect example is this line. G5, knight f7, queen g4. Black's already in big trouble. Knight c6, castles. b5, queen g3. Like I said before, this diagonal is extremely crucial. Bishop c7 as an idea. The point is that if you play b4, and this has been played in tournament chess before, knight takes d5. E takes d5, bishop c7, sacrificing a piece, queen e7, and now bishop g2. Simple chess. King is stuck in the center. The d5 pawn is going to fall next. You're not castling. My position is dominant. The game is over. It's impossible for black to do anything. The only move is to play rook to a7, trying to target the bishop. Bishop takes d5, and now b3. Like, if you're telling me that your opponents are going to play rook a7 and b3, and I'm not even saying black is like fine after this, black is still suffering and suffering. But other than this, it's like it's lights out. So b3, please. I'm sorry. b3. Bishop takes b3. And of course, again, I've said this phrase 10 minutes. I could write a book about this position, but I have all my pawns still on the board. So I have a piece for 3 pawns, I believe. 5, 8, yes, 3 pawns. The king is completely stuck in the center. What more can you ask for? So this is some, general theoretical line that everyone considers completely fine. And then if I go to a game and they're going to play like, b4 and it's just lights out, right? So of course the only move here to not just be lost is rook to a7. And then now you play e4. And this is where things get ridiculously complex. And, if your opponent has not memorized every single little line here, they're absolutely done. First of all, the center is about to explode. The queen and king the queen is in the direct line. The king is still in the center. You're far from castling. And here you have, there's one move that you can play. Knight takes d4, e d5, e5. Like, first instinct is like, sorry, e5? Isn't that just hanging a pawn? But of course, knight f5 next. Then after queen f4, oh, you play takes? Oh, and then you play rook e7. I'm so sorry. That is just so logical. And you know what? Honestly, I should have just thought of that myself. Why do I need Stockfish to assist me in analysis when moves like defenses like this are just so ridiculously obvious? Queen f4, queen d6, queen f3, and the best is to repeat. So it's simply a representation of just how ridiculous this is, right? If this sort of rook a7 followed by knight d4 followed by e5, you're just saying it's just ridiculous. I've included this just to show how ridiculous and you guys will notice a pattern of I'm showing you guys these main lines, right, where I have found amazing resources that force our opponents to play extremely precisely, go and force them to play 10, 20 only moves. Right? It's simply not going to happen in a practical game that they're going to respond properly. It's simply impossible. So of course, bishop b7. The idea is bishop c7 as well. And once you sort of halt the attack, again, the queen doesn't get to a5. There's no attack, right? You're free to just develop the pieces and then break through in the center, right? e4 lingers. The bishop on c7 is amazing in combination with a queen. It controls absolutely everything. So this is like considered mainline theory, which is totally fine. And then they're gonna play b4, and you're gonna see knight d5, and they're like, oops. It's there really are some serious holes in people's theoretical knowledge, and that's why I still believe that I can play it at the top level, because I simply see the analysis that people are doing. I see what the best players in the world are doing, and it's simply not taken seriously, and that's because maybe I don't know what because no one really strong has sort of analyzed it the correct way, and that's why I'm making this course. So c5, one of the most logical moves, and we saw how things ended there. Let's say h6. Continue with h4. b5. Bishop g2. Again, sort of the normal developing chess. Let's say b4. The knight's going to go to a4. Again, sort of stopping c5. There are a few other. Again, don't get too caught up. There's there's c5 immediately is another one that we should. I like to go through this first, actually. In this case, we go queen f3. We don't have g5 here, but after knight c6, we play knight e2. And this is where things get really difficult, right? So captures, b5. We go g5. Again, this break is just crucial. You might ask, why not play castles? But it's really important just to sort of get this g5 break as fast as possible, because the queen, usually h6, the point of h6 is to sort of make taking not possible because the rook is undefended. But with the rook is being defended, this g5 breakthrough is just so powerful, right? So they have to go for some direct play, b5, g5, knight g8, castles now, queen a5. They're going for counterplay. You take an h6, forcing the knight to h6, and then we take on d5. This capture on d5 is extremely thematic, because we're opening things up, and opening up the center where the king is sitting there idly by, waiting to be checkmated. After takes, queen takes, bishop to b7, bishop to g2. This diagonal is extremely strong. The king is stuck in the center. Black's position is in shambles. The queen is on a5 doing who knows what. Bishop to e7, rook to e1, it's simple chess, right? There's no way that you're castling, because I can trade on h6 and then open up the entire g file, and that's leading to nothing but checkmate. The rook, the knight's ready to move to open up full pressure. Rook d8, queen to b3, simply going queen to b3. d5 is being prepared, followed by d6, crashing through. Bishop to b4, only move. Walking right into discovered check. Knight c3, king f8, d5, breaking through, putting so much pressure. Knight e7, bishop g5. Again, threatening d6. Bishop d6 is the only way, because you cannot allow d6. Bishop b7, d6. Remember what I said about stopping d6? There's no stopping it. Rook d6, bishop takes b7. We have recuperated our piece with an extra pawn. And of course, I will continue. I will stop it here. And as I wrote in my annotations, it seems like we have approached the end of the rainbow. So this was one of the really interesting lines that the computer suggested, and it just showed that White's play is just so strong and so natural. And this knight takes d5 sort of theme really puts an insane amount of pressure. White here has a slight advantage, but this is of course giving White the use of the computer and playing all the perfect defensive moves, which are just absolutely ridiculous. I think we can agree that this position, with every single piece working together perfectly, I think the bishop b4 is just a ridiculous move, because allowing the discovered check is just so unintuitive. If you're probably using more, unintuitive. What's a better vocabulary word for unintuitive? Is so alien to us. There we go. I'm like a human thesaurus. So yeah, there we can include h6 and c5, c5 without h6. The difference is simply queen f3. With h6, we're going to be going g5 immediately, right? Preparing it with knight e2, g5. In the other position, right, where we have c5 immediately, we actually go to the g4 square to keep the f3 square open for our knight. So I believe we covered everything in this position, but this is sort of be the main line, right? Everything after this is not like it's important, but it's not I think that for most of the players who encounter e6 and like the move b5 or the move c5, these are sort of more advanced moves. So it's so important to know the themes here. But I think e6 and this sort of structure, like this position with bishop b4 and knight e2, this position with c5, I think these are really the critical points that you should remember from this. Anyways, b5 is another strong move, and here actually the move h4 was sort of my idea, and it's really a strong move, and the point is actually quite funny. Black is in zugzwang, and the word zugzwang is something that you're probably only aware of in terms of the endgame. Right, like king opposition is probably the best example of zugzwang, or when the position's closed and there's not many pieces on the board, the zugzwang. But here, both sides have all the pieces and it's zugzwang, right? You might be like, well, what is going on? Well, the point is that the point behind b5 was to extend space on the queen side while preventing g4. But we're simply playing h4 in anticipation of e6, because we're going to play g4 anyways. So the question that we now are posing to our opponents is, how are you going to make a move that's helpful without allowing g4? Bishop b7 allows g4. e6 allows g4. g6 would allow h5. So we're sort of saying, okay, well, I'm ready to go. You might ask yourself, c5, and you're just dead lost. Pawn takes, knight c6, knight f3. If e6, knight d4. If you recapture with the pawn consolidating. If you defend the knight, I take and go b4. Everything's consolidated. I'm up a free pawn. Game is over. Connected, pass pawn at that. So we're forced to go e6, and then we play g4. Here, if they play h6, we transpose. Here, if they go b4, now we bring the knight to a4. And again, there's also some transpositions as well. Bishop d7 is the most logical move, just simply attacking the knight. Then we play c4, which is a really nice move, protecting the knight, also adding pressure in the center. D takes c4, d takes c4, bishop d6, challenging this bishop. We're going to play g5, forcing the knight to make a decision. The point being, if they're knight d5, you want to take this knight, force the structure, and then go knight to e2. Reinforcing this bishop, preparing rook c1. We have great, king side control in terms of the pawn structure. We also have this backwards pawn on c7, which we can target. We have the outpost on c5 for the knight, and also some maybe potential attacking chances with h5, g6. So this is sort of a natural path that can lead from this b5 without e6. But h4 is crucial because it's sort of saying, I play h4. Might look stupid, but find a move that's useful, right? As I mentioned, h6 is a transposition to h6 immediately. Let's say e6, g4, h6, h4, b5. As I mentioned, we're playing bishop g2 here. I don't think we went through this, but after g6, it's sort of a weird move. I debated including these sort of moves and including this. I could have just left it out, but considering it's a lifetime repertoire and considering that this is a lot of just new theory and I think it's groundbreaking for the opening itself, I wanted to be as detailed as possible and meticulous. In this case, we're going to play queen f3, which is, again, this is not a foreign move to you guys. Knight e2, castles, queen g3, even castles kingside is possible. Let's say knight d7, we go queen g3, as we've seen so many times before, preparing bishop c7, c5, bishop c7, and now we just simply go a3, sort of taking away the b4 square for the queen. I think it's just such an amazing move because the idea is cd4, ed4, queen to b4, getting this queen. But once you play a3, the queen is simply stuck. And you can't even move the bishop because then the bishop will come to d6. in control. This diagonal stopping the king from castling. So black is almost in zugzwang. And I think putting your opponents in zugzwang in the opening is certainly a good sign. So back to here, the other sort of ways that things can deviate is c5. We covered e6 and b5. c5 is sort of, the point is we want to play c5, but we don't want to allow any knight b5 ideas. So now we take, and this is actually quite a popular way to sort of, for things to continue as well. But again, the thing is that I think I mentioned this in annotations. The most popular move here is knight c6, and I just want to read what I annotated here. I wrote, lo and behold, the most common move played by Carlsen, Duda, Fressinet, and many top GMs. Funnily enough, the computer gives a 0.65 evaluation. There seems to be a common misconception in the current state of theory. I wonder if this hole could be exploited. So, it's so great to see like all these top players who are, trying to play a6 and trying to be nuanced against the opening, trying some new ideas, and them playing a line that's just simply like bad. I just think that's ridiculously funny and is an amazing reflection of how poor the analysis is from my counterparts. We play the move a3, preparing b4, and this pawn is going to be saved, right? If you go e5, I play bishop g5, and if you try to take this, f6 is hanging. Now, the only way to even try to hold on is to play d4. E takes d4, knight takes d4, and after b4, everything is completely solid, and we're in like only move territory to stop white from getting a +2 advantage. As we mentioned before, b6 is absolutely critical to challenge a center. Now we play knight f3, continuing with development. Again, we must, black has to go pawn grabbing. Bishop to c4. We've converted our pawn advantage for a huge lead in development. Here there's bishop e7. There's also bishop to e6. Let's look at bishop e7 first. It's just a natural developing move. Knight takes e5. We recapture the pawn. Castles, castles. And we're up a pawn. We have the initiative. Bishop f5 is a nice way to try to create counterplay, targeting the c2 pawn. Bishop to e3 is crucial, targeting the d4 knight, aiming to open up the c6 square for the knight to go to. Knight takes c2, queen d8. Again, this is a forcing variation. Please don't get too, overwhelmed. Bishop d8, bishop c5, knight a1, bishop f8, king f8, rook f8. This is sort of where things, again, we've reached the end of the rainbow. And we're up a pawn. We have pressure on f7, so a second pawn is lucky to follow. We have this 2-on-1. a6 is a weakness. f7 is a weakness. I would say the black's chances to survive this are quite low. So this just sort of shows, in this case, after knight c6 here, in this position there's also bishop e6 to sort of directly challenge, but this gives us a great positional advantage. We're going to take and play bishop takes f6. But queen takes f6 isn't really possible for various reasons. Queen d5, knight e4, and e5 is saying you have to take with a pawn to solidify things. Now we go knight d5, taking the outpost, possibly going to play c4 to support that knight. And now the only move is to play f5, hanging this pawn, because any other developing move, like say bishop to g7, will allow us to play knight h4 and then cement that on f5, and the knight's on f5 and d5, dominating the light squares. It's how are you going to, ever challenge these knights? The bishop is stuck on g7 behind the structure, so f5 is absolutely crucial. Extremely difficult move to play. We simply play g3, preparing knight h4. After bishop g7, knight h4, knight to d4 must be played. To protect this pawn, we go knight e3, again, putting more and more pressure on f5. c4, sorry, and then f4, trying to do some things, but knight comes to f5, castles, castles, takes, and again, I might be going through this sort of the variations quickly here, but I just want to say that it's more the concepts that matter, the exact moves, but basically, we've tried so hard to get this knight to f5 and get this dominant. We actually just trade the knight, and after king g7, we're going to play queen d2. So, this ridiculous sequence even here, after some insane defense, Black's king is in shambles. The a6 pawn is weak. We've got a passed pawn that's protected, not connected, but protected. Black's position is extremely loose. And just to note that if any moment Black allowed us, let up for one moment and played a lazy move, then everything would have collapsed, right? Like let's say you played e4, knight f5, takes. Things are going to be coming to an end very soon, right? The knights are checking everything that everything's collapsing. Might be down the exchange, but where's the rook going to go? Here, you lose the queen. So this is just, it's really just difficult, especially once you've gotten to this point, right? To be able to play a3 and force them to play e5 followed by d4, which just aren't givens at all, followed by b6, right? Like, let's say you play bishop b7, you think everything's normal. After takes, knight e4, it's +2. You're threatening knight to d6. Bishop b7, c3. Once the knight moves, you trade the queens. You got a 4-on-2. The game's over. The game is completely over. Bishop g4 is another move. You simply play bishop b2, knight e2, even knight d6. The details, right? Intermezzo next to capture. B7's weak. King's in the center. King, I think it's just ridiculous how easily it would be to beat a top player. When they play knight c6, you play a3, and they sit there and question, why they didn't buy my course. So in this case, after c5, queen a5 is the better move. In this case, we play knight to f3, queen c5, bishop to e2. This is of course very natural as well. So okay, and there's also e6 is an idea. This is actually quite a common. But let's look at queen a5 first. So we bring the knight out, queen c5, bishop e2, knight c6. There's also e6 as well. We're gonna get into that, but basically we're gonna be targeting this queen. It's kind of funny because I sort of have been the biggest proponent of bringing your queen out early, and this opening is certainly not a contradiction of that. Bringing your queen out early is what you got to do in the Jobava London, right? So in this case, we're actually going to be punishing our opponent for bringing the queen out early. So let's say they play move knight c6, castles e6. This is a transposition, so we'll go with the e6 move order because for castles knight c6, we're going to reach this position. So here we play the move knight a4. The queen is a little bit of a tough spot. If it goes back to a5, we play c4. And again, another position where we have a huge leading development and our opponent's king in the center. So what are we going to do? We're going to play c4. We're going to open up the center. After pawn takes, we play knight c3. We're not going to take back immediately because b5 would fork the bishop and knight. We play knight c3. Say, okay, I dare you to play b5. And then we say, okay, you want to try to play b5? I want to play a4. I'm going to crush the entire structure. Everything's going to collapse. You want to play, b4? I'll just simply go back. I've got time to take this pawn. I can even go knight d2 and take this pawn. Knight h5, only move. If they understand how strong this bishop is, they're going to be chasing that, that bishop. Simple, a normal move, right? Let's say bishop b7. You're going to go knight to d2, knight to c4. Once you recapture that pawn, again, the queen is still going to be in shambles. Where is it going to go? So knight h5, bishop g5, of course, not letting them take the bishop. h6, g5, and this is another amazing move. This is also a theme in the London, especially, of when this bishop is attacked, playing knight after d2 to target this, because after they take it, we take back. Now this pawn is still hanging. Our opponent's king is still completely open in the center, and this bishop is also targeting the f7 pawn. c3, b takes c3. And then, I just like for you guys to guess, the only move, for that what Black has here. Because if you're going to recapture, I'm going to play knight e4. I'm targeting c3, threatening knight f6, knight d6. You have to play bishop b7, ignoring the pawn, of course. And then after knight c4, I decided to end it here. Again, maybe I'm holding on to you guys. Maybe I'm keeping all this the 50 move analysis for myself. But there's no reason to continue here because I've proved my point. Black's made some ridiculously difficult decisions as Black has been put under significant pressure, and still the position remains extremely complex and difficult for our opponents to play. And that is the entire goal of this course. So another idea is to play c3 in anticipation of that. But then the great thing is after pawn takes, you actually play bishop b7. You really don't, Black cannot afford losing any time because any time that's used is simply going to be an extra tempo that leads to this king being, attacked in the center. You play bishop b7, takes. Point is queen to b3. Sorry, queen to b3, and then now rook to c1. And again, still things are a little bit loose, right? Knight a3 coming next. The queen is sort of restricting this bishop with the tender bishop on b7. Knight a3, knight c4 is possible. The bishop, everything's sort of just working. The last piece is to bring this knight into the game. So this gives Black, white a slight advantage and definitely some nice play. So just throughout this variation, right, with it really forces, and again, if they just develop, we take the pawn and then everything's good, right? If we can win back the pawn and we, then simply this queen is weak and we have a significant lead in development. So let's say the queen goes to a7. More it's less of a target, we play the move knight to e5. And we're going for a very specific idea. Well, first of all, knight c5 would be, I guess, the traditional response. And then let's say there was like a queen on d8. You would just play bishop d6 to challenge this bishop. But the point is now is we want to play bishop to d4, forcing the queen to b8, and then bringing the knight into b6, forcing the rook to a7, and then even be winning material, right, if it was our move. Forcing them to play b5 to open up some space. Now we simply go knight c3. And we're going to be playing a4 next. Again, further provoking our weakness. Bishop e7, a4, b4, knight a2. c3 is coming next. Castles, c3, takes. And we've created this 2-on-1. As illustrated with the arrows, a5 is going to be played. We have the b6 square, especially. We have the two bishops that are working well. The bishop on e5 is great. Knight can come to a4, then to b6. This a6 pawn is going to be a weakness for the rest of the game. So from this perspective, if our opponents, go back, it's just going to be queen a7. It's extremely difficult. So let's say they delay knight to c6 and they play bishop to e7, which also is a logical, way to play. We again continue with this knight a4 idea, queen a7. But in this case, we're going to play e4. And I think this is honestly beautiful because it just shows how powerful the initiative and the leading development is. Let's just keep in mind, in this position, our king is castled. All of our minor pieces have been developed. And still, the only two pieces developed from our opponents are the knight and queen. If we're at, this is a huge initiative. Bishop e7 and e4, again, bishop e3 just being so powerful. Forcing b6, the only way to prevent bishop e3 coming with tempo, we take on d5, we simply go bishop to g3. c4 is coming next. Then b6 is going to be weak. Bishop b7, c4. Look at this queen on a7. What is this queen doing on a7? It's stuck. It's suffocating itself, right? Without you're playing without a queen, and the king is still in the center. We still got a huge leading development. Queen b3 is coming next, putting pressure on b6. Right? This is a terrible position for Black. And again, it's like things were so normal, right? Like you brought your queen out to recover the pawn. You played e6. You played bishop b7, knight a4, and suddenly you're lost. How did this happen? Bishop b7 is another move sort of directly preventing knight to a4. And in this case, we're going to play queen to e3, going for the immediate e4 break. And again, time and time again, we're seeing our opponents are behind in development and we're going for the immediate central breaks, seizing the initiative. Knight c6, we play a3 first, prophylaxis, stopping knight to b4. Now we're ready to play e4. Again, knight h5 is a critical move, stopping this. let's say bishop to e7, we play b4, forcing the queen to a7, and then rook a to d1, we are in no rush to play e4 because this queen on a7 is just so ridiculous that it's really important to bring the rook to d1 to fully prepare e4. I know I mentioned that we should brick immediately because the king's in the center, but in this case, the queen is just so ridiculous that from a positional perspective, our opponent has just no idea what's going on. Knight h5, bishop e5, encouraging them to take because now we go knight takes d7, knight takes 7, e4, fully, this is the breakthrough, right? Again, 2 moves away from castling. We have a huge lead in development. We're going to be attacking. So when you have opposite colored bishops, it's helping your attack because you can fully attack on the light squares. In this case, with light squares, and the defense is very difficult when it's opposite colored bishops. So this is simply the dream of what we're going for in this opening, and this is an extremely difficult position for black to play. So we're saying that like in this main line, we're playing all these simple moves like with queen a5, but then in all these positions, it's simply collapsing. This knight a4 idea, taking advantage of the queen, taking advantage of the sort of the holes in the dark squares is just ridiculously powerful. So I think that's just the critical point to remember from here is just this knight a4 idea, breaking through c4 and e4 in specific cases. So I think I'm really happy with this chapter on a6 especially because a6 was a move I faced quite a bit, and it seems to be trendy among top players. And I think this is where I really found the biggest holes in the current theoretical understanding. So I think it just sort of shows, right? Like, when our opponents are going for c5, they're sort of giving up a lot of development because a6, first of all, it's not the best use of time. Queen a5, queen c5, that's like 3 moves in the opening. It's really important to take that lead in development and continue with the initiative as soon as possible. We're also noticing that the use of the a6 tempo also allows us to sort of immediately extend with g4, g5, taking over kingside space, castling queenside, and going for a very immediate attack. So I think those are the crucial themes for this specific chapter. And again, I think there are a lot of theoretical breakthroughs here that I'm looking forward to being able to discuss publicly once this course is released. So thank you guys for watching the chapter on the move 3, a6. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to the next chapter.